Hello, and welcome to the Office of the Patriot, where we try to make sense out of the nonsense of the progressive left and Rhino right. I'm your host, Myron Ybarra.
And I am your co-host, Angry Mike.
And in this episode of Office of the Patriot, we're going to discuss an ongoing problem with our criminal justice system that has been brought to a head as a result of the Daniel Penny trial. Now, many of you are probably thinking that the problem lies with the partisan hack district attorney, Alvin Bragg. And to a certain extent, you are correct. But that's a micro area of a larger problem. The macro area is actually quite a bit more sinister. And what's going to surprise many of you is, well, we're part of the problem. Now, as I said in the introduction of this episode, this problem is a lot larger than just the Daniel Penny trial. With our system of jurisprudence, we have adopted a process of criminal law that is based off of the idea of an accused person being innocent until they're proven guilty. I'm sure many of you have heard that phrase at least once in your lifetime. But is it really true? Are people really innocent until proven guilty? People as a whole generally look at a set of circumstances and immediately start to form an idea or definition about what they're seeing. And unless they get new information and rather quickly, this idea will begin to solidify in the minds of the person forming the idea as fact. Case in point, how many of you have driven by someone who's been pulled over and is going through FSTs, a field sobriety test? Did you immediately think that person was innocent? What about seeing somebody at a local courthouse who's walking into court wearing an orange jumpsuit and waist chains? Did you think, yeah, that guy's got to be innocent? Well, probably not. Now, I'm not saying that everyone does this, but I'm saying that a significant portion of people do. And we make snap decisions based off of very limited data. And this is the driver of how law enforcement officials, police officers, DAs, and even attorney generals are rated on their job performance on very limited data. You see, district attorneys are rated by their convictions. How many cases are they able to secure convictions on? Just like using stats to measure a police officer's effectiveness at their job. The higher conviction to case ratio, the more favorable they will be looked upon when it's time for re-election or when they start looking for greener pastures up the political food chain, like I believe Bragg was doing with this case. This was one of the drivers for Bragg bringing this case, but it wasn't the only one. And honestly, I don't believe it was the primary one, but it does deserve some mentioning. When we start looking at competency and using convictions as a metric to measure competency, it's going to put a burden on these prosecutors to secure convictions, no matter what. And if that means doing unscrupulous things, you can bet that there will be some that will do just that. In the case of Bragg, he didn't do just that. He brought the case that arguably was going to be difficult to win, even in a blue area like New York City. But he did this because he's a Sorrel Place politician that happens to be a New York district attorney in Manhattan. And he also has his eyes on bigger things within government. That's one component of a very large problem, using convictions or arrests or any number of involuntary contacts law enforcement has with the public as a mechanism for rating law enforcement effectiveness and basing job retention and promotion on this rating. So now that we've went over where the laws and our system of jurisprudence comes from and how it can negatively impact law enforcement, we need to look at the damage this case actually caused our country as a whole. And I watched an episode of Outnumbered last Monday, shortly after the Daniel Penny verdict was read. During the commentary phase of each one of the hosts of the show, they brought up a number of different issues that resulted from not only the trial itself, but the verdict. So here's the first one we're going to talk about.
So, Larry, did America watch a city maybe pull back from something that would have harmed everybody? And that is, you punish heroes who step up. Is that what we just witnessed?
I think so. I think he deserves a medal. I don't want to, Kaylee and I are talking about it offset. Absolutely. I mean, I think once again, Alvin Bragg gets his ears pinned back. The guy never deserved to be district attorney. He should be impeached if such a thing were possible, but it's not in New York City.
Larry Kudlow recognized one of the problems surrounding this case, the district attorney Alvin Bragg. He had suggested that there needs to be some type of an impeachment process for law enforcement officials, specifically DAs, who are engaging in partisan lawfare. And I agree with him. There are far too many district attorneys and attorney generals who are introducing their political ideology in the performance of their duties. Now, you hear the Democrats screaming about the separation of church and state all the time, but very seldom do you ever hear them talking about the separation of politics and the judicial system. And I believe to my core that this problem has more of an impact on everyday Americans than the issue of church and state. The problem is, how do we solve it? I mean, many of our elections that we have for positions like DAs are partisan, even though they say they're not. And if they are appointed positions, that governor or that mayor is going to appoint somebody that leans politically their way. Well, here's my solution, and it's two-tiered. First, for the hiring process, we do away with solely either appointing or elections for judicial officers. We use the same process that about 14 states in the nation have adopted that was initiated by the state of Missouri, and it's referred to as the merit selection or Missouri Plan. And for those of you who are interested in getting more information on this system, I put a link in the description section below along with all of the receipts for today's presentation. So feel free to peruse them at your leisure. Essentially, what merit selection does is splits up the hiring process for judges, in this case, into two parts. The mayor or governor will appoint a judge, but that appointment comes from a list that is generated by a nominating commission or board. So the prospective judge goes through a quorum and gets rated. The board will send 5 or so names to the governor or mayor for the appointment, and then this quorum is generally made up of everyday citizens as well as attorneys who ask the candidate a series of questions to determine their competence. This type of hiring and vetting process is probably the most fair way that you're going to get people into these positions that are just going to do their damn jobs. This limits the ability of the appointing power, the mayor or governor, to pick who they like because the commission determines who can be selected. And the next process would be exactly what Mr. Kudlow said. In positions where a person has absolute immunity, which includes judges and prosecutors, all of these positions should be subject to either recall by voters or impeachment. So now we would have a way to minimize political bias by the individuals that are coming in. But if someone still gets in and uses their political ideology to guide their actions on the job, we have a way to get rid of these hacks as well. Mike.
I agree with you. This is not my background, so I'm going to defer to you. You're the expert on constitutional law.
Won't go as far as expert, but thanks.
Anyway, as far as what can be done and what cannot be done. But as a layman, I'm just speaking, using my reason. I would think there's a way for the U.S. government to get all the states on the same page. There should be. So I guess I'll pose a question back to you. Since the commies never run out of ideas how to skirt the law in their favor and punish their opponents, can Congress propose something like a constitutional amendment allowing, state voters to recall or impeach their state-appointed judges and prosecutors?
Well, they can use a constitutional amendment. They can adopt one via the legislature, yes. However, I think it will be a lot easier to just propose a bill to do the same thing. Now, the final problem from the one I talked about and earlier, and in this area, I believe, and it really pains me to say this, Emily Campagno got wrong. And I'll just let you listen to what she has to say before I give my 2 cents.
Emily, what precedent does this set?
Well, as a New Yorker, it sets the precedent that now people hopefully will feel encouraged again or emboldened again to step in when everyone around them is terrified. The reality is that jury saw this for exactly what it was, which is someone coming to the rescue of everyone else terrified in a car. And those of us who live here, who take public transportation, experience this kind of stuff all the time. And it's because of the lack of law enforcement, because of this crippling, ridiculous district attorney that we've been subjected to an explosion of crime on the streets at the hands of those recidivist criminals that law enforcement can do nothing about because their hands are strapped.
As I said, it does pain me to say this because Emily is one of the few Fox News commentators that I hold in high regard. Actually, all of the regulars on the Outnumbered couch are, well, fantastic. So if you haven't watched them, I highly, highly suggest you do. But that said, Emily said, people will feel encouraged again or emboldened again to step up. And while I would absolutely love to agree with this statement, I think the damage was done the minute this case was brought to trial. Now, don't get me wrong. This verdict did give at least some relief that justice would be served in the event of political biased prosecution. But honestly, how many people do you believe are going to be willing to step up and do the right thing for somebody they don't know that in blue Democrat cities, they have a very high likelihood of being prosecuted for being a good Samaritan? Penny stepped up and helped passengers on the train who either didn't have the wherewithal or the skill set to solve the problem, and he did. He was under no obligation to do what he did, but he did it anyway. He put himself in harm's way to help somebody he didn't know. And this is how he was rewarded. He's rewarded with thousands of dollars in legal bills, notoriety that I'm pretty sure he never wanted. And now he's saddled with having to uproot his entire life to find a place where he can live like any normal American. And well, that just sucks.
I definitely agree with you with your analysis about what Emily Campagno said. I also disagree with her because, while I think we all can agree that it was great that he was found not guilty, it still sets the stage for the rest of us that we're going to be put through hell, like you said, financially. He's probably getting death threats. If we decide to try to be good Samaritans, I can't say if I would do it. The only solution that I can think of is to physically move away from these liberal cities and states. So just let the liberals suffer the consequences of their asinine voting preferences.
I agreed. That's one of the many reasons I fled California. But I'm hopeful that Trump and his administration can help fix this mess by revamping the federal law enforcement arm of the United States government. And maybe hopefully we'll get a trickle-down effect to the states and local government as well. I've said this before in prior episodes as it relates to the social contract that we Americans accept by virtue of living in this great country. First, if enforcement of the social contract is relinquished by government, the people will have to fill in. And that's what we saw with Daniel Penny. So to minimize these incidents, our government has to empower law enforcement to assume a more proactive role in high crime areas like New York subways. Otherwise, this is going to continue to happen again and again and again.
Agreed. And in my opinion, Trump should really concentrate on doing everything in his power to put all the federal pull all the federal funding from going to any of these states that seems to, consistently weaponize their justice departments against the people and their political opponents. And that includes not enforcing the law for those that break it, or for reducing sentences for certain groups that, dangerous people, people that I think most people would agree should not have the sentences reduced, and they still seem to do it. Alvin Bragg has done that, countless times now. So I really do hope he does a full court press on these commie mofos.
There's plenty of ways to skin a cat or a Democrat. Metaphorically, of course. I mean, we're not talking about skinning people. Next, if we obey the law, we're free to live our lives pretty much the way we want to. But if we choose to break the law, then government has an obligation to bring lawbreakers to justice without passion or prejudice. What happened in the Daniel Penny case was an example of what happens when the passions of a misguided district attorney, Bragg, supersede the obligations of his office. And unless we start making some changes to the system, we are going to see more of this type of lawfare in the future. And this concludes today's episode of Office of the Patriot.
And if you enjoyed the presentation, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share the channel on your social media. We really appreciate it.
What he said. Also, please take the time to comment. Viewer engagement via comments is the major metric for channel accessibility on most social media platforms like YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, X, MeWe, you name it. The more people that like, subscribe, and comment, the more this channel will come up when social and political content like this is searched for. And as always, have a blessed day. Stay safe out there.